They have explained that they live in a constant state of fear of retaliation. If someone asks me, should I report fraud within DHS? I say, no, no, no. It is career suicide, because if you lose your job, you lose your home. They had pictures in their personnel files of their own homes and their cars. They asked where their children went to school and where their bus stop was.
As far back as 2014, there were credible whistleblower allegations of millions in daycare fraud.
The IGs have failed. But anyway.
You all have failed.
No,
you all continue to fail. We've done nothing. You've had the gavel, Mr. Comer. We barely do hearings on anything that actually affects.
Things are getting really, really chaotic in Minnesota right now. It is actually, seems like everything is hitting at once. You have protests going on. Obviously, you have an ICE operation that ended and a woman being killed. At the same time, you've got sworn testimony coming out that Minnesota's government ignored fraud warnings for years.
What's going on in these childcare facilities?
And when you raised awareness, were the Governor Tim Walz and the Attorney General made aware of these warnings?
Oh, I'm sure.
Did the state leadership fail to act promptly? I mean, it kind of sounds like they did if you still haven't received any information regarding these warnings.
Yes, we don't know that they took any action with the list we gave them.
So we're going to definitely dive into the hearing. But before we do that, we need to talk about what's actually happening on the ground right now. I'm sure you guys know about this story already, but yesterday a woman was shot and killed during an ICE operation in Minnesota. And there's multiple camera angles, multiple views, and depending on your political affiliation, you probably already decided what already happened. Some people are calling it murder, some people are calling it self-defense, some calling it a cover-up. And I think we're going to really have to wait, at least in my opinion, till that body cam footage comes out. That really matters, because once that footage released, we know exactly what went.
So they are already trying to spin this as an action of self-defense. Having seen the video of myself, I want to tell everybody directly, that is bullshit. This was an agent recklessly using power that resulted in somebody dying, getting killed.
ICE agents repeatedly ordered her to get out of the car and to stop obstructing law enforcement, but she refused to obey their commands. She then proceeded to weaponize her vehicle, and she attempted to run a law enforcement officer over. This appears as an attempt to kill or to cause bodily harm to agents, an act of domestic terrorism.
Based on preliminary reports and based on what I've seen, Christine Noem, she said that the ICE officer was actually hit by a vehicle. And I've seen some camera angles showing the ICE officer in front of the vehicle. Then we see the bullet hole in the front of the car. So if we're going by basic logic here, you don't get hit by a car unless you are near it. So if that bullet hole is in the front, there's a good chance the officer was in front of the vehicle. But obviously that's not a verdict right now. That's not a defense. We'll see what happens with the body cam footage. That'll be the final judgment in terms legally. But the problem is Minnesota is already on edge. And this situation poured gasoline on a fire that was already burning. We can also jump into one of the big updates that's going on in terms of the Quality Learning Center. They finally closed. Not suspended, not temporary shut down, but finally closed. License surrendered. Doors shut.
We're talking about the Quality Learning Center near downtown Minneapolis. First it was closed, then it was open, and now we've confirmed it's closed again. A search of the state's online system reveals Quality Learning Center now closed as of January 6th. A 180-degree turn after our cameras recorded a parade of parents and children into the business last week. 5 investigates that Quality Learning Center requested closure of their license on Tuesday. No answer from the daycare's owner.
Where there's smoke, there's fire. Perhaps they're trying to avoid something.
Which matters because this center became one of the most visible examples of the fraud conversation. And here's a question no one can really answer. If this was a legitimate daycare, why close? I mean, think about it. You have the attention. You still have the funding. They still had the opportunity to say, hey, this is a real daycare. Bring your kids. You would have had the 70 kids that you were needed to run a real business. They could have pivoted. They could have cleaned this up. They could have shown that we are operating a real business. 70 kids, a real program, a real second chance, but they didn't. That's the part that really sticks out because real businesses don't shut down when the spotlight hits. Fake ones do. And when the money dries up and the scrutiny starts, the doors will close. And that closure becomes a quiet confirmation that something wasn't right. So let's get into the hearings because this is where everything connects. So while Minnesota is in a chaotic situation, this testimony says that this fraud didn't come out of nowhere. It wasn't a surprise. It wasn't missed. According to sworn witnesses, it was known. Warnings were sent, audits were done, and people inside the system raised those red flags. And instead of being protected, they were scared into silence.
At that meeting, they were both former and current employees. I've continued to message with them very often, sometimes daily, and their collective message has been completely consistent. Instead of focusing on fraudsters, DHS leadership instead focused its surveillance on employees. Since then, their expressed fear of retaliation has intensified under an avalanche of fraud in Minnesota. They have explained that they live in a constant state of fear of retaliation. One only has to look at what happened to Faye Bernstein to understand why. In 2019, Bernstein said she alerted Minnesota DHS officials to sloppy contracting practices that were not legally compliant. But it's not what most people would even consider fraud. She says she was later escorted out of the building, faced lengthy investigation, got trespassed from all DHS owned and leased properties, and received an involuntary transfer to another state agency.
So this alone tells you everything, because if people inside the system are scared, the system doesn't work. The system is broken. These people are just state employees, people whose whole job is to protect programs meant for kids, disabled people, families who actually need help. And according to sworn testimony, they were afraid. Not uncomfortable, not frustrated, but afraid. Fear changes behavior. Fear makes people stay quiet. Fear makes people look the other way. And fear is exactly how fraud survives for years without being stopped. According to testimony, this was a culture, a system where whistleblowers believed speaking up would cost them their careers.
You have an understanding that 1,000 whistleblowers running an account on X have come forward to expose fraud in Minnesota state agencies, and they have been entirely ignored by Tim Walz and have even been retaliated against. Is that accurate?
That is correct.
And were the whistleblowers ever made to feel unsafe on their attempts to report fraud?
Yes, absolutely.
If Tim Walz truly did not know anything about the fraud or thought things were taken care of, then why were the people trying to report it living under fear? You don't intimidate whistleblowers in a healthy system. You protect them. You listen to them. You investigate what they're saying. But that's not what happened here. Instead, testimony says that employees were retaliated against, investigated, isolated, made examples of. And once that message spreads internally, everyone else gets the signal. Keep your head down. Don't ask any questions, and don't rock the boat. That's how fraud grows. That's how millions turn into potential billions of dollars. This wasn't just a failure to act. This was a failure to listen, a failure to fix the problem. And once leadership allow fear to replace accountability, the outcome is inevitable.
So she says, so today if someone asks me, should I report fraud within DHS? I say, no, no, no. It is career suicide plus a whole lot more. So let's talk about that plus a whole lot more. In our face-to-face meetings with a group of whistleblowers, they revealed that retaliation now includes threats of being fired with cause, which means you do not get unemployment insurance in the state of Minnesota, being blacklisted from all state agencies, and I would note most likely our largest counties as well, which are Democrat-run. And then there was a veiled threat of the use of military intelligence against them.
So this is a work culture where reporting fraud becomes career suicide. The system is no longer designed to protect the public. It's designed really just to protect itself. So let's be clear on what that means. This is coming from the people inside the Minnesota's Department of Human Services, people who saw fraud, people who wanted to stop it. And their advice to others were simple: don't say anything. In a functioning government, whistleblowers are protected. They're encouraged. They're supposed to be treated as assets. Here, according to sworn testimony, they were really treated like liabilities. And this explains why fraud didn't just stop at one program, or two, or three. The message stated there was, keep quiet or else. No one wants to be the next example. No one wants to lose their job, their reputation, or their ability to work in the government ever again. So you have to ask yourself this question: how does fraud reaches hundreds or potentially billions of dollars without people knowing? It doesn't. It grows because the people who do know are afraid to talk. Governor Walz talks a lot about compassion, about protecting people, but obviously this didn't work here, especially for the people that was trying to report the fraud. If reporting fraud ruins your career, fraud is not the problem. The system is the problem.
They later informed me that it was discovered that in some targeted employees or suspected whistleblowers' personnel files were pictures of their homes and their cars. They also described that supervisors asked them questions about their families that to them felt like a threat. One example was, "We need to know where your kids go to school and where their bus stops are." I will also note that whistleblowers we spoke to described many times that DHS used surveillance programs to surveil employees' emails and chats and other communications, looking for keywords like fraud, double billing, underspending, and overpayments.
There is absolutely no oversight here. It is only intimidation. There is no legitimate reason for a whistleblower's personnel file to contain pictures of their house or their car. None. Zero. This wasn't just passive indirect retaliation. This wasn't someone getting passed over for a promotion. This was active pressure, psychological pressure. Think about what this message sends. I know where you live. I know your routine. I know your family. You don't need to say the threat out loud. This was a pattern. They were monitoring communications. They were watching employees instead of watching the people committing fraud. That tells you where the priorities were in the Walz administration. Instead of asking, where is the money? Where is it going? The system is asking, who's talking? Governor Walz never directly denied that this intimidation ever occurred. Not clearly, not forcefully. And that silence really proves something. It really matters. If your administration was serious about stopping fraud, then the people raising the alarm should be protected, not tracked.
Yes, sir.
When do you think Governor Walz knew about this fraud?
From the very beginning. He was running for governor in 2018 when there were prosecutions going on, when there was an OLA report, active cases in the news all the time.
And what was the Walz administration's response?
They actually did nothing when they got into office, and Lieutenant Governor Peggy Flanagan had been on the committee in the legislature that had hearings on childcare fraud, and when they got into office, they did put $5 million into a little more money, but nothing changed.
But nothing.
Once knowledge is established, there's not a lot of excuses. It wasn't speculation. It wasn't hindsight. This is just sworn testimony, and it cuts through every single talking point we've heard over the years. You cannot oversee a state where massive programs are bleeding money for years across children, housing, Medicaid, autism services, and not know if something is wrong. It's just not realistic. This wasn't a hidden situation. There were audits, there were warnings, there were people ready to talk. There were prosecutors, there were indictments, and yet the money kept flowing. That wasn't just failure to stop the fraud. It was a failure to change course even knowing it existed.
They also described that supervisors asked them questions about their families that to them felt like a threat. One example was, "We need to know where your kids go to school and where their bus stops are."
This was a governor who inherited a problem and just allowed it to grow. Why? Well, politics. The fear of backlash, the fear of the headlines, fear of being called racist or Islamophobic. And instead of confronting that fraud head on, leadership decided to choose silence and delay and intimidate people who wanted to speak up. That choice didn't protect communities, it hurt them. Every dollar stolen was a dollar not feeding kids, not housing the disabled, not helping families who actually needed the support. This is why Walz didn't run again. Not because he felt like stepping aside and he could have won if he stayed in. No, because the record was going to follow him and it wasn't good optics and he was going to lose.
First U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, the leading prosecutor in these cases from the Biden administration and the Trump administration, says the fraud could be an astronomical $9 billion. In the face of mounting reports and literal criminal indictments and convictions, the Walz administration has repeatedly and publicly denied or downplayed the fraud. Just last January, the commissioner of DHS, Jody Harpstead, who'd been on the job for 5.5 years, said, there's a lot more rumors of fraud than there is actual fraud.
You know, once you hear a number like $9 billion, that stopped really being about the paperwork errors or saying it was some sloppy oversight. It becomes a situation where a system has completely lost control of taxpayer money. The fraud obviously didn't happen in one place. It spread across so many programs, the housing, children, autism services, Medicaid, transportation, multiple agencies, overlapping providers. This was a network of fraud. And what's really insane about all this is Minnesota is one of the highest tax states in the country. People are told constantly that these taxes are necessary to protect the most vulnerable. Yet, according to sworn testimony, billions of dollars may have been siphoned off while leadership didn't do a damn thing about it.
There was an audio recording made at that meeting that was entered into evidence in the Feeding Our Future trial, and it was later revealed through work from Center of the American Experiment, the full recording. And my observations of what took place in that meeting was that Attorney General Keith Ellison was focused on one thing and one thing only, and that was keeping these folks in business. There were no questions that he asked of these folks about how the kids are doing, the operation, how they're getting fed, who's being helped. Instead, the focus was entirely on ensuring that the money continues to flow. And I'll add that he went so far as to say that he was going to fight these people in reference to the state agencies.
Here's a man that definitely should step down. The Attorney General of Minnesota, Keith Ellison, the top law enforcement officer in the state. And according to sworn testimony, his focus wasn't on stopping fraud. It wasn't even asking about how many kids were being fed or whatever services that were real or not. It was just to keep the operations running. When the Attorney General signals to continue this fraud is more important than accountability to stop it, everyone below him gets the message. Don't rock the boat, don't slow the money down, and don't ask any hard questions. And obviously that message doesn't stay quiet. It spreads through multiple agencies, it shapes decisions, and it discourages enforcement. The testimony also described a meeting where Edison's attention wasn't on verifying services or protecting taxpayers, but on making sure that those payments continued, kept the money flowing. Now, when you combine that with everything else we've already covered, whistleblowers were afraid to speak, warnings were ignored, and that money kept flowing anyway. At some point, this stops being really about incompetence and starts being about priorities and who's benefiting from this. Walz and Edison both positioned themselves as moral leaders, as defenders of vulnerable communities, but nothing of that sort ever happened. What came first for them was politics. Optics came first, fear of backlash came first, and the people in Minnesota are paying the price. So right now we have chaos in the streets of Minnesota. You have the situation with the ICE agent that shot this woman. Then you got some daycares quietly shutting down their doors. And at the same time, you see what's going on in this testimony. I think more is going to happen in the next couple of weeks. But this is total chaos that's happening in the state of Minnesota. And there's only one person you can really blame. The most powerful man in the state, the governor, and how he failed this state. But let me know what you guys think about this story in the comments below. Thank you for taking time to watch this video, and I'll see you guys in the next video.